what a game. That's so cool that you play offshore. And we'll get into that a little bit. But I'd like to start out with, your background. I know that you were talking the last couple of days, before this podcast. I didn't know that you grew up in the Keys.
Yeah.
Were you born down there, or how did your family get there?
I was born at Fort Lauderdale. But my family, my dad's side of the family moved to Florida, came over from England in 1927 and gravitated to Florida. Apparently the story was my great-grandfather was in World War I in the Machine Gun Corps, and he had met some Americans in the trenches, and they talked about the Everglades and the Keys and Florida in general. So after the war, 27, they took a ship into Ellis Island, and they were brick masons. My great-grandfather and grandfather came together with my great-grandmother.
Wow.
And they made their way to Florida in the 30s. And just to fish and hunt, and lived off Sunrise Boulevard when it was a dirt road. And, went to the Keys one weekend and another weekend to the Everglades. So, and my father was born in Lauderdale and kept doing the same thing. They built most of the brick, were involved in a lot of the brick homes and buildings in Lauderdale. They used to do work for Gill Homes, which you may have run into Ben Gill.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so,
I didn't know his family was in the construction business, building stuff.
Yeah, his father.
Yeah.
Before finally kind of retiring with the hotel, the old Yankee Clipper. But and Ben was one of my clients there for a little while. So.
And then why did your parents move to the Keys? They just wanted to be around.
My dad worked on commercial boats.
Oh, okay.
And he worked on a wide array of different boats. Growing up, my first experience was when he was running a boat out of Merritt Boatyard for Triple M Seafood, for the Mott brothers, and it was a long line boat, and I would go out on weekends with him. And
how old were you at this time?
So this was in the 70s, and so I was my early teens.
Right.
And they put out 10 miles of gear, and I'd help bait some hooks and untangle a lot of stuff, and my brother and I'd get to catch a bunch of dolphin coming and going, and caught our first sailfish doing that.
So it was long lining. You would set out 10 miles and just let it sit.
Yeah, you put it out just before dark and then pull it the next day, and there'd be all kinds of sharks and swordfish and
Crazy
marlin
stuff.
And the ocean was teeming with life at that time. No comparison now. So then from there, my dad bought his own commercial boat for snapper fishing, and so still in my early teens started going with him snapper fishing.
Oh, that's so cool.
So he was based out of City Fish and Marathon, and lived there and other places around middle of Marathon, and so having my fishing background, learning it from my dad. When he'd go off sometimes for 10, 15 days. So I had my fishing rods and my bicycle, and
that's how I grew up too, chasing fish on my bike and a fishing rod.
So, were you the cleaner? Did you have to clean all those snappers after?
We gutted them. Yeah, did a lot of gutting and packing. In the.
Did you like that?
Box. I didn't know any better.
Yeah, it
was just part of life, and you just did it. And I wouldn't want to do it now.
Well, I remember you were saying that.
But I can clean a fish pretty good. I've cleaned hundreds, if not thousands of them. So
I remember you were saying that you guys used to go to Stouts and see all the flats guys in there. And I remember my first years down there, Harry Spear. I met Steve Huff in that restaurant,
Dale
and Dale Perez and Dale Brown. All those great guys that were down there. It seems like they all had breakfast and they fished out of Stouts. They didn't fish out of a marina. A marina was the second stop, but they all started at Stouts.
So for me, being able to ride my bike there in the morning, being able to peek in their boats and see all their gear was pretty fascinating. I just had a beat up fishing rod with a Mitchell Garcia reel that bought from a flea market, so had jigs and a bag of shrimp, but I could see what direction these guys would go, see their boats, and then ride all around town and get to people's backyards or behind the high school, and you could see the guys out there. So you figured, well, I'm just gonna have to wait out there, and did a lot of waiting, and to start learning how to catch bonefish.
Were you waiting out behind Marathon School there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, that was a good flat.
In different areas. I mean, even up in Grassy Key behind JoJo's, there was all kinds of places. And when I lived on Grassy Key off Morton Street, I would take a ladder and just go put it in the water and
climb on top,
stand on the ladder and just wait and, learn the tides. Eventually you start figuring out when fish are coming through and they have their patterns and take advantage of it.
Were you pretty successful?
Yeah. It was a lot easier then.
Was it?
So
how many fish a day would you see during those years?
Oh, you could easily see a dozen fish or more in some smaller, bunches of schools. And but I was always trying to find the big fat tailors. And of course, they would get up along a lot of these beaches, so it was actually sometimes easier to be on land than it was later as I guided from the boats.
So on a high tide, you can catch them nearby.
And then, my struggle was having clients that were good enough to cast. And, I got a lot of people out of the resort, their Hawks Cay, where I first started guiding out of. And eventually I just figured out where to stake out and do a little bit of chumming and have the guy standing on the bow with his rod, whether it was a fly rod or spinning rod, and throw a couple rods off into the baits into the channel, and some of them would say, "Oh, I want to sight cast it. I was like, all right." But after a while, when you're telling them 12 o'clock and the bait lands at 3 o'clock, and the fish is gone. The rod would bend over on a covering board, and I'm like, okay, go pick it up. And they get it and pull out their old, the old style cameras and take a couple shots, get their hero shot, and they were just as happy.
Did you gravitate to tarpon at all when you were younger guiding?
I did a lot of tarpon for myself personally and friends around the bridges and channels. It was I called it back then the poor man's Marlin. You could go out there, catch some mullet, and get a couple jumps out of them. And I didn't like to try to beat them. Just get the bite, get a few jumps, get them through the piling. Get them past the power line poles, and get up on them and break them off. I did a lot of real small hooks back then, which was uncommon. I was using the 9174, the brown, there was a name they call that, but it's a brown hook, and we use them for sail fishing quite a bit. So what I do is I was out of kind of somewhat laziness, but had a lot of confidence in this 4.0 9174 at the time. Eventually they made a beaked one, and that kind of switched over to that. But you got your sailfish rods are already set up with 40 and 50 pound leader. And so it was easy just to grab those rods off at the end of the day, throw them on the skiff that, I'd have right next to the boat, and throw the bait in there and go out there. And when, at that time, everyone was using, for the most part, 130 pound leaders and like 7.0 hooks. And then,
Was that a pretty hard fish to catch with that big of a
Yeah,
of a hook?
I think there it was a little. I think I was a little bit controversial in with the guys that where I fished because sometimes I would do a drop back versus a lot of them were just doing off the tip, drop the tip to it, strike it. So
So drop back means open the bail.
they
and
could get
let-
it a little further down.
So you
But,
wanted
you
to
know,
get them gut hooked.
not necessarily gut hooked, but definitely, a little bit further, and your hookup ratios were a little bit better. But I didn't. The difference between what I did was I really liked to, I'd have my engine set up and a quick pull on the anchor, and I'd fire that thing up and I'd spin that boat around and take off after him because I was into numbers. I wanted to catch, my best night with ex-girlfriend. We were prepping for the ladies tournament. We got 16 fish in one night. So
Caught.
yeah, to the leader, just running up on them, grabbing them. So
What was the fishing like back then? I can only imagine that it was probably pretty prolific.
well, I went back with a friend, Dave Farrell, a few years back. Rick Murphy lent him his Maverick, and he got a little place on the water to stay at on Long Key, and he knew that I was from there, so he's like, "Hey, come on, help me catch some tarpon with my kids," and it was harder to catch bait, and then when you were at the bridge, some goofball and a windsurfer were flying by you, and boats just running everywhere, and
jet skis,
jet skis, and it just. I mean, it was kind of overwhelming.
I can't even imagine what South Florida was like back then when Sunrise Boulevard had a dirt road.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
as
like,
I was growing up, State Road 84 was a 2-lane road, and from 441 all the way out to Andytown, where was that 27 maybe, was orange groves. And so when we go out to hunt out there, we would come back home like Sunday night and just fill up our brown paper bag, grocery bags full of oranges. And, obviously we were stealing them, but there was so many. I don't think anybody would.
They're not going to miss 10 oranges.
No, nobody seemed to care. But bass fishing was really good. We spent a lot of time crappie fishing at night, camping out. And,
cool.
And
what a great childhood.
Yeah, it was fun.
Did you have any mentors when you were younger, other than your father introducing you to that whole world down there? Like any big names in the backcountry fishing scene, like Steve Huff and Harry Spear?
No, I
and
never
those
really
guys?
had any interaction.
But you knew them all. You
I
knew
knew
them
who
all.
they were.
Right.
And I went to school, there with Dustin and Chad, and rode the same school bus for a number of years. So, I knew I was friends with Dustin,
right,
when we were teenagers.
That's crazy.
I didn't know that.
Because now you're working with each other at Chittum.
Yeah. Well, part of that was because of our relationship when we were younger. You know,
sure.
He wanted that 80-mile-an-hour skiff, and I, knowing that could be a potential disaster if somebody doesn't know how to handle themselves.
So he was the perfect guy to test all that, and
so I had a lot of faith in him.
Yeah, sure.
Knowing that we ran a lot of boats growing up, a lot of friends.
Was he fighting when you knew him?
Knee boarding. No, he wasn't in his fighting stage. We were at that time. We were.
Did he always have a temper?
No, I at that time when we were hanging out, I was working on the charter boat at Hawks Cay, and his best friend was my washdown kid, and so he'd come to the boat as soon as he got off the bus, and Dustin would be hanging out with him. And
what was his name?
His name was Nate Grill.
Yeah, he died.
Yeah,
he died.
Yeah.
They're coming back from, I think, a New Year's Eve party in Fort Lauderdale to the Keys, and he was in the back seat, if I'm correct, and the driver fell asleep, and they died in a car accident.
It was real sad.
They were best friends. Yeah,
Nate, if you thought Dustin had a temper and got wild. Nate was 3 notches above. I mean, that
Where
kid
do you
was
fit in
wide
with
open.
where do you fit in with that
Well,
caliber?
you know, I had my run-ins in different kids, and you know, fortunately was able to hold my own.
Yeah.
And
That era in the Keys, was that just sort of like what you did?
yeah,
Or
it was a different time. You know, you know, I hung around the docks a lot because I was, you know, wanted to make my $5 off washing each boat. And yeah, that's what I made, man. And I felt like I was a millionaire, man. I would wash 3 boats a day after school, and then I could, you know, make $20 going out on a charter on the weekends.
Right. When did you make that switch from wanting to be a backcountry guy to wanting to go offshore?
So that was my hobby. You know, let's just say. I mean, I was really focused. The offshore was my job. You know, it's where I was making money when I started.
Mm-hmm.
But there was always, you know, I was always out in the skiff fishing somewhere, whether it was catching snappers. And, you know, we didn't have, you know, the kind of year-long season that seems like Keys has now. You know, usually in end of August, you know, somewhere in August, September, October, the Keys would be a ghost town.
Right.
And, you know, when I first started, you know, jumped on the charter boat when I was 16, I wasn't prepared for the, you know, I started in the middle of or the height of the season. And next thing you know, I got all this cash and living large and money's coming in, and all of a sudden, end of summer,
Stops.
it dried up. So I had to go back to commercial fishing.
Did you dump your girlfriend because you couldn't afford her at that point?
I think she dumped me for fooling around. And so we never made that tournament. So unfortunately, but yeah, I had to, you know, I had to do other things than fish. So
well, it's interesting that you mentioned that, and for the viewers that are listening, a lot of the big tournaments came to be because they wanted to get their clients that they were fishing in the prime season of May to come back in June and July, so they can make some money and bring some money into the economy. So that's why the Gold Cup and the Holly and all these tournaments got started like 60 some years ago, to get the people back because of the issue you just said. It was just a ghost town.
Yeah. I had to unfortunately go back to work with my dad a couple of times.
Unfortunately, did you butt heads?
Yeah, because when you worked on the boat, you know, we did a lot of anchoring, and there was a lot of anchor pulling. And, you know, there was times where we could drag it, we could pop it and drag it and never have to pull it up. But I had, the last time, I said, I'll go with you, but I'm not pulling an damn anchor. So he hired another guy to pull the anchor, and I did a couple more trips with him, but I had to, I repaired traps, you know, for a while, and getting them ready for the season, and crab and lobster traps. And that was no fun. They're full of snakes and scorpions and everything, rats, and pretty nasty work. So did that, and then realized I needed a boat. I got to catch some fish, and so with my skiff, you know, I was able to, you know, go catch snappers. You didn't need a license at that time. You just roll up to the fish house, and I had an account there, and drop them off, and they give you cash. So I had that, and then started taking people tarpon fishing on the bridges at night, and then of course got my license, and I was allowed to do it legally. I got
how many years were you breaking the law?
I got caught before I was 18 for running trips, but they were mostly local people.
When did you start running trips?
I started when I was 16.
Yeah.
So
did you foresee yourself being a full-time flats guide for the rest of your life, or was it?
You know what? I did when I first started. You know, when I fished with my dad, and you know, I thought it was funny. You know, my dad, he didn't want, you know, he thought the whole sport fishing thing was not a good direction to go, that I should, stay commercial fishing. And
Because of money or why?
money, or maybe he thought I'd take on the couple boats that he had and
Help him
keep
out.
doing it. My brother didn't really like fishing at all. So, although, I really loved all types of fishing, had interest in all of it. But I was saving money to buy there was Hall's Bait and Tackle. It's at the end of the island. And I used to hang out in there a lot and check out all the tackle and talk to the guys. And there was always camaraderie in tackle shops. And they had a combination rod for bonefish hanging on the wall. And my mission in life was to get that rod. So we had our own box on the commercial boat. So we'd go to Fort Jefferson and fish there in the winter. And in the summer months, we would go to Case Al. We'd fish Case
Fort
Al.
Jefferson, that's Tortugas.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. So on a Tortuga trip, I loaded up a box pretty good, and I caught a 100-pound black grouper by myself on hand line. Of course, I didn't get the last 15 feet. I'd been fighting it for about an hour, and then my dad's crewman came over and saw it and knocked me out of the way and got it and yelled at my dad, and my dad grabbed the gaff and they gaffed it. But I did the heavy lifting for the most part. But so I had a pretty good cache of fish that I was, delivering to the fish house. And so my dad said, "Oh, you made a lot of money." And I had this handful of cash. I don't remember how much it was, but he said, "What are you gonna get a new bike or some skates?" We were into roller skating back then and skateboarding. And I said, "No, I'm gonna go buy that spinning rod for bone fishing." He said, "What? You're gonna go buy an idiot stick and fish like the tourists?"
Fish like the tourists.
I said, "Yep, that's what I'm gonna do." So, and so then I had my rod, and then I checked out all the Stouts guys, and working. My dad bought a commercial boat at Key Colony Beach Marina. It was a head boat out of Key West. It was called the Tiki, and some people called it the Leaky Tiki. It was an old 1940s Navy personnel carrier, and somehow it ended up in Marathon for sale. A bank had it. The slip was paid for the summer, so I got to hang out the whole summer. It was somewhere in the early '80s on the dock, and I was the $5 kid, man. I'd wash your car for $5. I'd jump in the water, get your keys or glasses for $5. Cut the rope off your wheels, wash your boat. It didn't matter. And so I just started banking and hanging out. Then once I got to know everybody, which was, you say about mentors. So, you see all these captains and crews and what they're doing fishing every day. And there was really so many of them that, that I learned from.
Mm-hmm.
My dad gave me a really good start, but, the commercial world's a little bit different than the sporty world.
So many people got their foot in the door through mating, working on the docks. Harry Spear was an offshore mate for a while before he became a backcountry guide. Dingo, he was a young kid. His dad was a fisherman. We spoke to him yesterday. Then he started getting on these big boats and ended up fishing all around the world and doing what he did. And he always wanted to be a fisherman, but it's hard to find the money. So the ground roots of making money, I think, a lot of times is go to a marina where, like what you did, you wash boats. You
people
clean
ask me
fish.
all the time, how do I be a captain like you? I said, go to a dock and tell people you're ready to work.
Yeah.
Go bust your ass.
Go to the
Start
ground
at the bottom.
Go to the bottom.
And if
So
you're
awesome.
passionate and you want to catch a marlin and travel the world and you can't afford a 80-foot Viking, that's the way that you interact with these creatures.
That's how you get on that boat. How long were you a skiff guide, backcountry skiff guide, before you got to the offshore boats, and how did you make that transition?
So so I was mostly in the offshore boats, and the skiff, like I said, the skiff thing was more of my hobby. And by way of being at Hawks Cay and having this connection to clients, that were coming out of the hotel, there was Matt Pribble was the guide there. His father, John Pribble, and talking about mentors, he would take me out for scouting, and if I wasn't on the offshore boat, so he was my first guy to help me learn how to get into the Everglades. Show us, we didn't have GPSs back then. You had to use a compass. You had to know how fast your boat was going, and basically a watch. If you're running and you didn't find that stick or that channel in 15 or 20 or 30 minutes, you're going the wrong way.
You're lost.
So yeah.
And now how do you get reconnected?
So with him, of course, never got lost. I later started, out on my own and going with friends and did get lost, but, learned how to get back on. Learned a lot of land ranges. Mm-hmm. That was very important. I had the girlfriend that I was living with, her mother's boyfriend. He's drawing a blank on his name. I'll probably remember it shortly. But he was in the Marine Patrol. He was one of the head guys in the Marine Patrol. So, tarpon fishing, you're running at night a lot. So you have to learn the lights and the light ranges, and you're literally using street posts and signs and, all kinds of other things. So, that was a great experience to have guys like that would show you around. I think my first time I ever picked up a fly rod was one of Matt Pribble's fly rods, and he was waiting for a charter and was slinging it around, and we were waiting for our charter to go offshore, and I ran over and like, hey man, let me try that, and so I got it and started slinging it, and he ripped it out of my hands. He was like, "You're gonna mess my fly line up. Give it back," So. Because clearly I didn't know what I was doing, but
you were intrigued.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty interesting. Kind of made fun of the fly fishing guys. I think
they're easy to make fun
of. Yeah, they're back then, because there weren't a lot of them, and they were usually pretty egotistical. I think they thought,
oh really,
they were all next level, and
like above, like they're above us.
Because it's harder.
Yeah, and I didn't fully understand the technique that was necessary. And I was a fish killing machine. And, in the conventional world, I mean, we would throw hundreds, if not thousands of pounds of fish on the dock every week, from, blue marlin, mako sharks, tiger sharks, bull sharks, dolphin. I mean, I caught so many dolphin. I think by my third summer, I was having nightmares of just
cleaning dolphin.
You have 6 customers back there, and you're baiting hooks. It's hot as hell. You're sweating. You're getting sunburned, and you have 6 tourists with spinning rods pulling them in, and you're just taking them off, throwing them in a box. Might have to tie another hook, throw on a bait, which it was similar to my commercial fishing experience. So I didn't really have any problem doing it, but after a while, it just started kind of getting burnt out.
Did that inspire you to make the switch to fly at all?
No. So what had happened, my fly experience really started when there was a guy that came to town that nobody knew, had a dark blue skiff, and was tarpon fishing under the bridge in the evening, and you'd see him around different flats, and you can tell, he was following myself and a few of the other guys that knew the area. And then there was some people that thought
he was poaching.
Yeah, pretty much. He kind of knew how to, he knew the drill, and he just figured out who was fishing where and would come in there behind you, and then he'd be in there in front of you.
What's his first name?
So that time we
It's
didn't know
coming. It's
who
coming.
this guy was.
He's going to be
And
exposed.
So there was talk that, half the town thought he was a drug smuggler and dealer, and the other half thought he was DEA. And there was all this talk about this new dude in town. And I came running into, I'd work the offshore boat all day and then try to get a trip at night and to make more money. The mullet were $25 a dozen, and they'd give you $50. You get your $2.25, I think, for the trip and $50 for your bait. And so if I could catch that bait, it was like an instant tip. So I'd get Nate cleaning the boat, and I'd jump in the skiff and my nets and go hit the mullet spots. And I'd seen this guy in the blue boat creeping around, and I come pulling into a spot, and I could tell somebody had already been throwing a net in there. It was all dusted up. And I thought it was one of the other fishing guides. And then I come around the corner, and there's the blue boat with this guy and his girlfriend in it. And we had some words. And I literally told him, I'm like, hey, man, why don't you buy your mullet like all the other rich guys and quit screwing up my spots? I said, I know you didn't know these mullet were in here until you drove by me the other day. And so he said, hey, man, you ever smoke any Thai stick? And I had heard about it in high school, but I didn't even know. I thought it was like a myth. And I'm like, no. He's like, why don't we join up together? We'll smoke this Thai stick. And then I'll drive the boat and you throw the net, or vice versa, and we'll team up. Because it is a lot easier with two people. So I agreed, and we ended up fishing together quite a bit after that. Caught a lot of mullet, and I'd take my trip, and if I was done with my trip and was going back, I'd give him my bait, or he'd do vice versa. So we teamed up and
So obviously,
got to know him pretty good.
obviously you like the Thai stick.
Yeah. It was some pretty strong stuff. We didn't have stuff like that in the Keys, so
Thai
at the
stick.
time. So later, I found out that he had smuggled that stuff into the United States with sailboats. But
And we'll get to that story in a
yeah,
little
so
bit.
he had asked me to tarpon fish with him. Well, as he was practicing for the Gold Cup and the Holly tournament, he used guides Marco Jolis and George Wood, and so I was the fill-in guide to for the practice days. So which I was happy for, because I wanted to learn it, and he was learning it from a couple of good guides. So we would go to the spot they call the bowling alley now, and anchor up there and wait for tarpon to come, and the flies were a lot different then, and the tackle, and but we managed to catch them, and then he was getting into the offshore fishing at the same time, and he had a camera guy that went around, was a skier, Don McKenna.
Oh, yes.
So
From Aspen. I know
yeah.
him very well.
So Don was he rode around with him all the time and videoed everything, and for several years.
We're
And
connecting some dots here.
so
From Aspen days and Don and going to Marathon. He lived in Marathon.
yeah, he was living with Harry actually, and making all these videos at Harry's house. So.
Yes.
So the original builder and owner of Indies Inn was Herb Cameron, and he rented a house. Harry rented a house on the water, on the ocean side, from Herb Cameron. Really nice place with a pool behind it. A lot of big parties were done there, and so seeing the tarpon caught on fly, that was my first real experience, and was impressed with it. At the time, didn't have enough money to buy my own fly rod, so it wasn't going to happen for me at that time. But the sport fish boat that I worked on would go to Mexico, Cancun, Isla Mujeres every year for the spring. And that was a real, a real treat. A lot more sailfish there. And so Harry had gone maybe 1 or 2 seasons before I had met him. And but he had an issue with the owner of the boat's wife and wasn't allowed to charter the boat the next season.
An issue with the boat owner's wife.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't want to get anybody mad.
Yeah.
They know who they are. And so I had, he had asked me, he said, hey, you're going to Mexico, you're going to Isla Mujeres or Cancun? I said, yeah, we're going. He said, no, I'd love to do 15 days of fly fishing. And I had watched all these videos that Don had taken of Harry in Mexico and Costa Rica and St. Thomas. And I mean, I could watch them for hours, and they were really well done, cool rock and roll music.
Let me interrupt you here for a second, because before I'd ever seen a saltwater fish, Don McKinnon used to be a big film guy. I think he lived in Aspen, up near above Buttermilk West, and I used to go to his house. And he knew a lot of people that I knew. Aspen was very small. It still is, but back then it was extremely small. And I used to go to his house. We would be partying or whatever, but and he'd say, man, you got to see these videos. And he was showing me these videos of guys catching tarpon on fly rods and billfish stuff. I'm going, my God, where is this? And he was a buddy of mine from Aspen. And here we are so many years later, this whole story is coming to fruition. He was with Harry Gray, the great Harry Gray, and the whole tie stick stuff. So that's where all the dots are coming together for me. When I first saw this stuff, I was like, that's incredible.
So I went to the owner of the boat. It was called the Huntress. We were out of Hawks Cay and would fish the summers in Ocean City, Maryland. And there was a fleet of 3 boats, and I would jump from one boat to the other. And so after Harry asked if he could get the 15 days, I went to the boss and said, hey, I've got a guy who wants to fly fish. And of course, everybody thought that was ridiculous for bill fishing at the time. At least all my guys did, and that I was working with. And they brushed it off. And unfortunately, we had some cancellations. And the owner of the boat said, hey, what's going on with that fly fishing guy? And I said, no, he wants to do it. And he said he needs to pay up front, and or we won't be able to swing going to Mexico this year. So I went over to his house, and it was $1,000 a day, and he put $15,000 in a grocery, brown bag. And I drove up to the boss's house and drove into his garage and
like a drug deal. Shut
the door. Yeah, because he kept saying, I think that guy's a drug smuggler or something. I keep seeing him on the payphone at the marina. And so I ride in his, and Fred Reif, is the boss. He had, everything was, I called it pink, but he called it coral. So you get pissed when you said everything was pink. And so I wrote on his pink indoor-outdoor carpet in the garage, and he was all upset. I'm like, shut the door. And so he hit the button. He closed the door. He had a desk. We had rods and everything, and it was almost a tackle shop. And he's like, what's going on? And I dumped the whole bag on his desk of all the cash, and he was like, I knew he was a drug dealer. So
that's pretty funny.
So Harry flew in with his entourage.
And who did that include?
So it was Don. There was
McKinnon.
Yeah, there was a long-haired hippie dude that apparently was in a Jimmy Buffett band. I don't remember his name, but Harry had spent some time with Jimmy Buffett in the Caribbean years earlier. There was a guy named Dietmar Kosman who was a captain out of Isla Mirada. and then there was Harry's wife, and then Dietmar's wife, and I'm not even sure Harry was married to Cindy, but so this group comes on the boat, and Dietmar tells me what he wants rigged for teasers, and told me that teasing billfish is an art, and do not touch the rods. You will not. You will just screw it up. You have no idea what you're doing. Like, okay. We were very used to having anglers that we weren't allowed to touch rods, IGFA type anglers, tournament guys. So it was, you had your charter boat people that you had to get to the rods and get the fish hooked up. Then you had the other ones. So we were very cool with not touching people's equipment. So prepped everything, put stuff out, and they commenced to partying every night. And we weren't raising a lot of fish, and the fish we were raising weren't really responding real well. And so all I was doing was clearing lines and bringing new baits and passing drinks out, and the normal charter boat stuff. And after about the third day, Dietmar was a little too partied out, and he fell asleep in the doorway. And fish came up, and I'm like, "Hey, we got one up here." And Harry went to grab his rod, and like, "Hey, man." And Harry's like, "Tease it in." So I grabbed the rod, and I teased it in, and I popped it out, got the bite, got the fish on. And once the boat went into reverse real hard, Dietmar wakes up. He's like, "Well, why didn't you wake me up?" We tried. And he said, "Who teased the fish?" And I said, "I did." And then Harry said, "Man, he's better than you, Dietmar. I don't know why he hadn't been teasing all week." And he's like, "Why haven't you been teasing?" And I said, "Well, Dietmar told me not to touch the rods." He said, "Screw Dietmar." And at that point, Dietmar never got his hands on another rod the rest of the trip.
Was that possibly that trip a connection that this is something you want to do?
Oh yeah.
I mean, this was like, I'm feeding these fish, I'm teasing them, we're catching them on fly rod. I'm all over.
I learned, I was interacting with the fish that I never had the opportunity, and didn't even really understand that you could interact with a fish like that and control it. And so that was far more exciting than just waiting for a fish to bite. Actually, I learned a lot. I was able to teach anglers you don't have to just sit there and wait for a fish to take it away. Take it away. Take it away. Okay, now give it to him. So it helped me in my conventional work later on. But Harry, Dietmar was running a boat called the Ultimate Thule out of Bud and Mary's. And Harry had booked him for 30 days in St. Thomas. And I had been working basically for the Huntress crew for like 6 years. And Harry offered me the opportunity to be his teaser man at St. Thomas, and I dropped that job like a hot rock and signed up. And so knowing I only had 30 days of employment, unfortunately, but I figured that, I had spent part of a season in St. Thomas in '88. Now I'm going back there in '90. Mm-hmm. And so I kind of had to lay the land, and I figured I could get some side work to make up for it.
A quick question here. Was Harry already doing a lot of offshore bill fishing at this time? Or when did he make the move? Because Harry Gray caught so many world records on fly. So at some point he made a big commitment to chase these records. Do you know when that took place?
So he had started 2 years before that I came on board. And but what helped him to catch the records was a combination of my offshore experience and his fly fishing experience. It was, his rods were too whippy, the rods were too long, his hooks were too big, the fly line was too long. So those are all the observations that I made and made changes to it. And then I just really took control of the teasing side of it. And
wasn't Billy Pate an inspiration in one way?
Yeah. So his main goal Harry, he had a vendetta with Billy Pate, because at one of the tournaments they were at the same table, and Billy told, well, Harry was telling Billy about his attempt to catch a blue marlin on fly that season, and that he was going back to St. Thomas the next season, and there's a pretty good chance that he might break his record. And Billy told him, and Harry always would tell it in Billy's Southern accent. He said, "Boy, you don't have enough time or money to break my record." And that pissed Harry off. And so he was just on this mission. And
He didn't let up for a long time.
he was with the help of Dietmar. Dietmar was, picking boats for him and crews, and they had some pretty good. They did the summer before with a really good captain from up north on a Garlington called the Classy Lady, and those guys got a gaff and a fish, but they had ropes on the gaffs. The rules were kind of vague, and
They didn't know the rules.
and a lot of people didn't know the rules.
Mhm.
And you weren't allowed a rope on the gaff.
A flying gaff.
Can't be tied
Yeah.
to the boat.
Yeah.
Has to be a straight gaff.
Yeah.
We were able to go to the IGFA and at that time and ask if we could put a T handle on the gaff, and so we built a couple gaffs and in Fort Lauderdale, and took off to St. Thomas.
What
And
was that like? I can't even imagine your first
Well,
time going.
So the first time I went to St. Thomas, I flew there. And so they had asked me, because I wasn't technically the mate on the boat, I was Harry's teaser man. So they asked if I would help get the boat down to St. Thomas. And so I agreed. And Dietmar, he said to me, he goes, I know you smoke weed. And he was always harping on me about smoking weed. He said anybody smoking weed was dumb while he's doing a big line of coke, right? so he invited me to a party at his house, and there was a bunch of fishing celebrities there, and it was a big, pretty good party.
Any names you want to throw
No,
out?
I think
Come on, we want to hear the
I might
names.
get in trouble, but I did see a guy there that I thought was Flip Pallet.
I thought.
It turned out to be John Donnell.
That makes
They
sense.
look so similar.
So if Danelle was there, Flip was nearby.
Yeah, I thought, because I was like, "Hey, is that Flip Pallet?" And they go, "No, that's not Flip. That's John Donnell."
That's Craig Key.
And that was my first time meeting him, and so it was a lot of fun. It was a good party. But Dietmar said, I don't want any weed. And I said, "No, I won't have any weed. Don't worry. I know you can get all you want down there in the Virgin Islands. That's not a big deal." So we're chugging along, and Dietmar was partying every night, and he was up late hours, and I'd in bed early, and we back to having no GPS. We had our charts, and Alan Starr was our we had a big sit down with him, and he told us what island we needed to stop, and which go above this island, below that island.
So this is running from Florida over to St. Thomas.
To St. Thomas.
Yeah.
And Dietmar kept falling asleep running the boat. And I was sitting there next to him, and he was neck all the way back.
Oh, man.
Snoring away. And I was sitting there looking at him, and then this film canister fell out of his pocket. And so I jumped off the seat and grabbed it and opened it up, and it was full of Coke. So I was like, "Well, you asshole." Gave me all that grief, and now he's got this. And it could have been in the cockpit on the floor, and we could have been stopped by the Coast Guard. And that time the zero tolerance was a real big deal when they take everybody in the boat and all that. So I I kept it in my pocket for a while, and then
Did you open up and see what it smelled like?
no, I mean I knew what it was about. So, but I
You hid it from him.
yeah, I didn't want him to give it back to him. I wanted him to sweat it out, and I could tell he was looking for it. The other crewman was named he was Captain Craig Murphy, and they were co-captains on the boat, and so we got to St. Thomas, and we started our fishing, and it started out kind of slow, and people kept knocking on the boat late hours, asking for Dietmar. He was staying up at a condo up on the hill called Sapphire, and I was like, "Oh, he's up at the condo, man." And they're like, "Hey, can I buy a gram from you?" I'm like, "A gram? What are you talking about?" "Oh, sorry, man."
Wrong guy.
And
Oh, so he was dealing.
yeah, found out later he brought a whole kilo.
Was
St.
Harry
Thomas.
Gray involved with that too?
Yeah, Harry
possibly.
he paid for them. He bought it, gave it to Dietmar to bring down there.
Yeah.
And so they were partying like rock stars every day.
And that was the first time you realized that this kind of operation is going on.
Well,
With Dietmar selling.
yeah, I knew they were all, doing it recreationally
Yeah.
and having a,
Was
a
there
big party
ever a
almost
point
every
that you
night.
wanted to bail off that boat knowing that you might be at risk with these guys? doing what
later
they're
on
doing?
down the road, it started getting a little wild. I mean, you grow up in the Keys, you see that kind of stuff all the time.
Well, also too, I think big boats and offshore guys too partied hard. I mean, you read the book that Skip Smith wrote,
Yeah,
The Madam and the
it was-
Hooker. They were always in strip clubs and chasing a party.
Harry, every night we'd get in, I'm washing the boat, taking care of the equipment and getting ready to go to dinner and go to bed, and he'd go straight to the bar chasing women every single night.
I love that. I
I just can't believe you guys used to go out early in the morning and 8 foot
No,
seas.
we wouldn't go out
hungover.
early.
Oh, no.
No, we didn't leave early.
Well, regardless, you guys got to have hangovers.
He'd invite people, and we'd have new crew, and like Ron, he hired Ron Hamlin to, we fished the first moon. It was kind of slow for us. For whatever reason, we just weren't getting fish up. And then when we had him on, Dietmar was the captain, and he wasn't very aggressive on the wheel. And
backing down.
backing down, pivoting, whatever needed to be done. He was very one dimensional in how he ran a boat. So, and I hadn't fished with a lot of captains that were a lot better than that. And so I didn't realize that, that we were really in a bad way of not having the right skilled person on the wheel. So he brings Harry. He's out partying. The Loveland brothers, Stuart and Jimmy Loveland, brought Ronnie out of Venezuela because he was having a hard time down there, and with all the coke and what have you. And of course, first person he runs into is Harry, and they had a past together partying. So Harry and Ronnie start whooping it up, and next thing I know, Ron Hamlin's on the boat. And I had heard of Ron Hamlin,
Very famous.
heard, guys talk about his book and all the tournaments he won, and I was shocked to see this mess of a person that I had heard about was so legendary. And of course, with cocaine, he's next level asshole. And so it made for a pretty tough week. Moon, he fished the whole moon with us, and he then started dropping hints on Harry to get into conventional, go for some conventional records. So I had signed up for the whole fly deal. I mean, although the conventional thing sounded cool, all the work was left for me to do, fill the reels, do all the leaders, all the baits and everything. So So, I mean, I I pulled through it and got it done. But at the end of the day, whenever a sizable fish would come up, Ronnie would say, throw the whatever pitch, the 12 or whatever we had there. Harry would just keep throwing his fly rod. So he was just so focused with that thing, he didn't want any part. But so there was a little frustration there on my side. And then Ronnie got into trying to tie my knots in the cockpit, and I cut his knot off, and he wanted to kick my ass. And so I pulled my bait knife on him, and I told him I'd gut his ass like a mullet, get the effing out of my cockpit. And so he did. He got out, and
This is the Wild West on the high seas.
went back inside the boat, slammed the door, but I did hear him say that. He goes, "I like that kid, Harry." And because Harry said, "Ronnie, you better get out of his cockpit. He's going to stab you." And so we were got off on the wrong foot there, and we fished that moon, and now it was time to do boat maintenance, get your tackle together, get ready for the next moon. Harry and Dietmar were flying to Costa Rica to do a fly tournament, and with Tim Choate on his brand new boat, the Magic.
Mm.
And so Ronnie comes walking in at like 7:00 in the morning. Obviously pulled another all-nighter out there in the world of St. Thomas, and said, "What are you doing?" And I was rigging lures up, and I'm like, "I'm just rigging lures. I'm gonna wax the tower, you know." He goes, "You want to go fishing?" And I'm like, "Yeah, actually I do." He said, "So you know those Texas guys over there?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah, the ones that I stole the Texas flag off their boat." Harry paid me $100 to do it. Right? So I'm like, "Yeah, I got their flag down there."
Just gas being thrown on the fire in St. Thomas.
So they had been fishing for 10 days, at least was the story, and they had not caught a blue marlin. Johnny Orr was his dad owned the boat. I think he graduated college at 30 years old, and his dad said, "You can take the boat to wherever you want for a year." So he grabbed a couple of his buddies, and off they went. They ended up in St. Thomas, and Ronnie had charter fished them and that family, and he used to organize charters to go to the Great Barrier Reef. So he knew Johnny when he was younger, and Johnny knew him, and as a great fisherman as he was. And so Ronnie said, I'll fish with you, but I have to bring my mate." And at that time, I didn't even know I was Ronnie's mate, but I became his mate that day. So he said, "Get your lures that you have." And we were big into wide mold craft at the time. And
What's that?
yeah, that was a soft head lure. Mold
Okay.
Craft's the manufacturer. So Ronnie was semi-involved in Peter Wright and helping Frank Johnson developed a really nice lure, and it being soft, it made sense for teasing for the fly. So, but we also had them with hooks, and so I slapped the hooks in them, and we jumped on the boat, and the boat was at the fuel dock, and there was this crew on the boat. It was a 3-man crew, but there was no Johnny, and the boat was locked. And they said, "Well, Johnny's inside." And so I didn't even know who Johnny Orr was, and we became good friends after this. But the crew was kind of like caught off guard, and I felt like I was out of place. But I'm just following Ronnie, and we pull off, and we're out there on the North Drop, and they put their lines out, and Ronnie's up on the bridge, and I'm hanging with helping out the crew, and the door opens up, and I don't know if you ever met Johnny Orr. Did you ever run into him? He's from Texas, and larger than life kind of guy. Always had a good time, always had a smile on his face, very animated. He said, "Who are you?" And I said, I'm Ronnie's mate. And he said, the hook? Where's he at? I said, he's on the bridge. He's like, no shit. So the deal was Ronnie and I each got $100 for every marlin we caught. That's the deal he made. So of course I was pretty excited to be out there and try, prime time. So
explain why Ronnie Hamlin was known as the Hook.
Well, he had a
audience.
Deformed arm at
Right.
birth. I think it was his right arm.
It's kind of short.
Yeah, it's a little shorter. So somebody came up with the hook.
Captain
and
Hook.
It's kind of Hook, and so he was the real Captain Hook, man. And I can tell you, I was reading something that somebody posted about him on Facebook, an old captain that had hired him, and said, he was reluctant to hire him because of his arm, his disfigurement. But he said it didn't slow him down in anything that he needed to do. And I swear, he was probably one of the fastest reel winders I've ever seen.
And a lot of people,
with that hook.
Yeah, he could turn that handle like you wouldn't believe.
and he was on the verge of becoming a professional bowler. He bowled like
Right.
10
Oh, that's right.
300
Games.
Wow. Like 10 300 perfect games, like 10. He was unbelievable.
So here's Johnny coming out of his hole, late morning, and he's yelling at Ronnie on the bridge, why the hell haven't we caught a fish yet? And Ronnie, with I used to make fun of his chicken wing, and nudged Jorge Moore off the wheel, and bumped up to speed, and actually that boat was a Pasovich, and Ronnie had run it for several years. And so he was very familiar with that boat. And so he told me to put the lures out that I brought, and they had 4 130s, which was a little aggressive for there, but hey, whatever. So we put our lures on and started smoking around and hooked a really nice fish, and about 400 or so. And Ronnie turned the boat on it, and I had never, in all of my mating, 6 or 8 years of baiting professionally at that time or more, I'd never had seen a captain turn and run forward on a fish. And we were going down sea with it. And so we ended up on top of it in like 3 minutes. And especially with a 130, and it turned out Johnny knew how to use a chair. And so he was tight on that thing, and lines whipping through the water, cutting through, slicing through, vibrating back and forth because everything was so tight. And fish is all lit up, as green as could be. And the first mate went over there and grabbed the leader, and Ronnie's yelling, double wrap. And he got a single wrap and got the swivel pinched down on him, and ripped his glove off. And I'm pretty sure he thought he lost the finger. And so he was out of the way. The next kid went up there, and he didn't even take a wrap. He just tried to grab the leader, and the swivel went through his hand, so he got a little burned. And so, and I was standing there with a tag stick, and so it's not it's not good etiquette for the guest mate to jump in front of the other crew. But now they were both out, and Ronnie's yelling at me to grab the leader and double wrap, and which I knew all that. So we wired that thing up there and got it released, and then I think we ended up catching several more fish after that, and that's when I realized that Ronnie was next level as a boat captain, and I was like, holy shit.
Because he was really aggressive. And
he was aggressive. He knew how to handle the boat real well.
Because I know I know your reputation is that you used to back down real hard.
It's not just backing down,
but how to run the whole
getting the boat
thing.
turned around, using what power you have. You use the sea. You're using your rudders. There's a lot.
Did Ronnie teach you how to do all that by watching him? Or anybody else?
So what was funny, and I'll get to that, was but after I saw how Ronnie ran the boat, as I knew that if we didn't have Ronnie running the boat, we weren't going to catch a blue marlin on fly. So when Harry came back from his trip, and now Ronnie had had any source of coke for that 2 weeks, and we ended up fishing with Johnny. And we worked a different deal because the $100 a day for each of us for each fish was
he was losing the deal.
Yeah, so
it went to 50.
So we cut a new deal, and we stayed with him. And Ronnie and I really meshed at that point. And so when Harry came back, I'd said, Harry, Ronnie really knows how to run a boat. And if you want to catch your record, he needs to be running the boat. Dietmar needs to be in the pit with me, and don't give him any coke. You'll catch a record with this guy. And so Dietmar wasn't too happy about it, but he really didn't have choice. And Ronnie started running the boat, and that moon we caught Harry's first record.
Which was?
And which was 208, I believe, on 16-pound tippet.
Wow.
So then the partying really started. So it started getting really wild. And so there was a lot more late nights. The boat wasn't raising fish real well. And
why?
The props were bent. And I think they were bent because of the way Ronnie would overhandle the boat.
How would that not raise fish?
The vibration?
So there's a lot of different theories, about vibrations and low frequencies and high frequencies. And sometimes you just have bad luck. You're just not in the right place at the right time. In between the moons fishing with Harry, I signed up to commercial fish with Benny Spaulding. He had a boat there called the Play Baby. And the Play Baby was, although an old, 19, maybe late 50s.
That sounds like a party boat, Play Baby.
Yeah.
Well, the Spaulding family, right? They have a history in that as well.
Yeah. So
no, tell me.
I just know that. In the Keys, the Spaulding family.
Well, so Benny Spaulding Sr. had he got busted for some type of drug transaction, and he ended up going to.
We're going all the way back to bloodline now.
Yeah, well,
right?
the real bloodline.
Yeah.
I guess he was in the Air Force base that's a prison up in North Florida for a while, and but when he got out, I think his deal was he had to fish with he had to fish the Boy Scouts for like 2 years. So obviously he knew somebody. So when he was done with his Boy Scout commitment, he said, well, he was in jail. He told me, he said, when I get out of jail, the one thing I thought about that I wanted to do before I die is take my boat through the Caribbean and fish my way all the way down to Venezuela. And I said, like, yeah, that's cool. Me too, And so I was commercial fishing with him when Harry wasn't fishing, and we were catching tunas and selling them to the markets and the restaurants and what have you. So I really got to see how this Play Baby boat handled, and so Dietmar, we were at the end of the tour with the Ultima Thule, and Dietmar needed to bring the boat back. And so I told Harry, I said, Harry, if you want that 12-pound record, then we need to get Ronnie on the Play Baby. And so and Benny had rowed along with us on the Ultima Thule. Everybody was buddies and friends and partying together. So Harry cut the deal with Benny to fish us, and Ronnie bent the props on that boat too, actually. But when your props get aired out, you get so much cavitation, and they overspin, and then they grab water in reverse. They tend to bend back.
Yeah,
that's crazy how water can bend a prop like that.
Yeah, so it's so Ronnie was running the boat. He was running a pretty aggressively, which, was, his way. And Harry was giving us a bonus every fish that we would catch. He'd give us a $2,000 bonus.
For a record fish or just a
marlin?
If
it was a potential, if it was hanging on the scale. And for the marlin. So Ronnie was out partying, man. He disappeared for like 3 days. And we had signed up to do this tournament, light tackle tournament. And it ended up being Skip Smith on one boat, running Ron Hamlin on the other boat. And then Ronnie doesn't show up during the tournament. He's out partying like a rock star. So we had no captain. And we had to shove off. And Benny was like, I'll run the boat. And then, I commercial fish. Benny's like, he's a super mellow dude. Just didn't think he was an aggressive boat driver. We really didn't have any other choice. So off we went with Benny, and Benny smoked Ronnie Hamlin. He's by far the best boat handler that I've ever been on the deck for.
Really?
Yeah. So, but Benny went back to the bluefin tuna stuff, wiring bluefins and catching bluefins, and he's got to be over 75 now. So he was doing all that stuff. His dad had a charter boat out of Pier 5. And him and his brother ended up having charter boats, but then they ended up taking their charter boats over to the Bahamas and running ships over there, and then running stuff back and forth. So then he went off into that lifestyle of running drugs from a lot of different islands. He said he was good friends with the Prime Minister of Jamaica, and he was good friends with Somoza and the other generals in Venezuela.
Big red flag.
And so
you don't want to be bragging about that stuff.
I just like, whatever. These guys are just all wasted out talking shit. But later I found out it's all real stuff. We caught, I think we caught a fish that was 145 on 12 pound. And then we left there, hit all these islands on the way to Venezuela. We had to go to Grenada. And so I've been hearing all these stories of all this smuggling and money they've made and all that. And we ended up in St. Bart's, and we got invited to one of Benny's old friends, or not Benny's, Harry's old friends. It was a French guy that they had apparently sailed a lot of drugs out of the Caribbean and all the way up north. And the guy had this big compound, 12-foot walls all around it, ocean view. And we pull up there, and the big metal gates open up, and there's a guard on each side with a little French machine gun, and on a strap. And they let us in, and there was a kitchen next to the pool, and then overlooking the Caribbean. And it was funny that this guy supposedly had the nicest restaurant in St. Bart's, and so he had this super duper chef that was going to cook for us, and there was 2 skipjack tunas in the sink thawing out. And so I said to the guy, I said, hey, what's up with these skipjacks? And the guy's like, oh, he didn't speak very good English, but I could tell he was saying something about tuna. And that time, the whole sushi thing hadn't really kicked off, and that was 1990. And so I said to Benny, I'm like, hey, Benny, check out what we're having for dinner, just to get his reaction. And it was pretty funny. He said, I don't eat that shit. And I said, well, then I don't know what we're going to eat here tonight, because that's the main course. And the guy, we all were like blown away how good it was. The way he prepared it was raw, but it was pretty awesome. That was like my first real sushi experience. So we left out of there, And we like I said, we didn't have GPS, and they were all hungover, and they said, "Hey, George, you drive the boat, and I'm gonna get some sleep." And I said, where am I going?" He said, "You see that island over there?" I'm like, "Yeah." "Just go to the right side of that island. When you see the marina, wake me up." And so I ran over to that island.
Were you nervous?
Yeah, I just, okay, whatever.
Yeah.
I'd been driving my dad's commercial boat since I was a little kid.
Right.
I mean, I'd driven all the way to Case Al myself, 8 hours straight. And so it was no big deal. Kicked back and got there, went down the island, never saw a marina. And I just pulled the boat back and woke everybody up, and I was like, "Benny, there was no marina." He's, "Oh, bullshit. You're just not paying attention, Doug." "No, there's no marina." Turn around, go all the way back, no marina. And pulled up this little fishing boat and asked, "Hey, is this such and such island?" He's like, No, Mon, this is Montserrat." So we went to the wrong island. So we ended up making our way to Grenada, and the boat started running really bad. And so we had to find some local mechanics to work on it. Benny had some parts, injectors. It was an injector problem, and which is not uncommon. The old Detroit engines and leaking oil and injectors popping. So when you put the injectors in, you have to adjust the rack and all that. Something I never learned how to do, and hope I never have to. But so the locals got it all put together, and Harry gave me the passports for everybody and said, "Go clear out," which Benny, being the captain, was the guy who was doing the in and out clearance. But he was still, wrapped up with the engine. So I took the, paperwork on and went up there and gave it to this, Grenadian guy all dressed up in a police uniform and this little guard shack and with a couple other guys with him there. And he starts looking down at the boat, and he's looking at the passports, and he says, so where's Timothy?" And I said, "Timothy?" He's like, "Yeah, Timothy." And I said, "No, we don't have a Timothy on board." And he's like, "Really?" And then Harry came walking out, and he's looking at it. He's like, "Yeah, that's the guy." He said, "That's him. That's Timothy." And I said, "No way." I said, "Let me see his passport." And it said Timothy Thomas John on it. And I said, at that point, I knew something was up. So I was like, I said, "Well, I just went to work for these people. I'm just delivering the boat." His nickname's Harry. That's all I know. And he's like, "Oh, okay." And then they're looking at Cindy. Her name was Cindy Anderson on the passport, but she was really Cindy Rizzuto, Phil Rizzuto's daughter, the famous baseball player. Scooter, I think it was his nickname. But so they're looking at her age, which was like 24, and she was like 40, right? And one of those sun worshipers would never put sunscreen on. So
She was aged.
So there was no way she was going to be pulling off this 20-something-year-old age. And I said, "Hey, man, she drinks a lot. She doesn't use sunscreen. So I don't know what to tell you." So the guy, I said, "Can we get cleared?" And he says, "No." And I'm like, "Why?" He said, "Because immigration's not here. It takes customs and immigration to get you cleared out." I said, "Well, where's immigration? When are they coming back?" He said, "I don't know. They're at the airport." And plane landed. So they're dealing with that. I was like, "Great." So I walk back and I tell Harry, they kept the passports and the paperwork for the boat. So I walk back to the boat and I say, "Hey, Harry, they're kind of wondering why, I told them your name was Harry, and they see a different name on there, and I didn't know that you guys were giving me this funky passport, and they don't believe that she's 27 years old." And he said, "You go up there and get those effing passports right now. Get them back here." I said, well, I don't think they're going to give them to me. He's like, get them. We're going to start the boat up and we're going to haul ass. I was like, oh, great. And Harry goes, Benny, start the boat. So the boat got fired up and I'm watching them take the lines off and everything. And I go up there. I was like, oh, what do I do? What do I do here? I surely couldn't grab it and run, you know? So I said, hey, can I take the paperwork up to the airport and get the immigration to sign off on it? He's like, yeah, I guess you could do that. So I said, all right, well, let me have the papers. And they were in the Ziploc bag and walk back to the boat. I just jump on and we drive off. And these guys come running down the dock, all pissed off. And Benny's like, or Harry's like, go, Benny, go. Right? And he's like, don't look at him. Nobody, just ignore him. And Benny goes to spool that thing up and just black smoke poured out of it, man. It wasn't going anywhere. It was knocking and clanking. It was like, holy shit. So Benny said, Harry, we got to turn around. And then Harry's like, no, we're not turning around. We're going. I was like, oh my God, this is crazy. So he's like, nope, we're turning around. So we turn around. Then I'm thinking, okay, they're probably going to arrest Benny and Harry. But they just grabbed me. They took me off the boat and took me into their guard booth for several hours, interrogating me, trying to get me to admit that something was going on there. And I said, no, we were just sea trialing and we wanted to, your guys were working on the boat here and we just wanted to make sure it was running right before we spent the money to go up to the airport and back. And I just kept with that story and they said, okay, all right.
You are a fast talking machine.
So they said, don't come back. We're gonna let you leave and don't ever come back here. I've been back there several times, but
with a Timothy passport.
Yeah, well, not with his. But so we had to get our visas to go to Venezuela. That's why we were there, and then we got the boat worked on that day, and then took off and went to Venezuela.
Do you ever find out what the issue was with Timothy and the real Harry Gray?
Well, I know his brother got busted, and he has a twin brother named Lee. Oh no, it was Larry and Lee. So Harry was actually named Lee Bartenfeller, and Jim Gray. Well, everybody in the fishing world knows of him. The story that was told to me by him and Dietmar was that Jim Gray was actually a maintenance guy in a local trailer park in Isla Mirada, and they bought his identity. And I don't know where the Harry came from, but everybody always called him Harry. So he had his Timothy Thomas John passport and his Jim Gray passport. And when he was fishing, he was Jim Gray. Whenever he was doing something else, he was Timothy there. So
when did you get on the boat and start running the boat, or were you always in the cockpit?
I was
Harry?
Always in the cockpit, and I was the guy. It was my job to have all the right teaser rods, the right teasers. I made the flies, but Harry always tied his own tippets, and so I would set up the gear and get on a boat. Put taglines in the riggers. They're really needed for the teasing stuff. You name it. I was a walk-in tackle shop, had all the gaffs, harness, vests, and just moved it from boat to boat. So we went from the Ultima Thule to the Play Baby. Then we're in Venezuela. The engine problem persisted, and we got in there in the middle of the night in Macuto, and the only landmark that we had to go by was the blue Sheridan Macuto sign on top of the building. So as we were going down the coast, that's what we had to find. And once there it is. Oh. It was like Columbus finding land.
Yeah.
And, and so
interesting.
Went in there, and one of the things that Harry and Benny used to do was Harry prompted, like to go to all the strip clubs. I was in every strip club in the Caribbean. I didn't even know they had strip clubs. I mean, it could be a place the size of this room to an elaborate hotel. And
Skip said the same thing.
Harry knew every single one of them. And I kept hearing about how beautiful the Venezuelan women were. And there was a club that everybody kept talking about. And so the first night I got there, we got into the Sheraton Hotel like midnight, and they kept the restaurant open for us, and we had some Italian food there. And it was like, "Are you guys gonna go out tonight?" And they were like, "No, we're not going out." And I'm like, "Really? These guys are always going out. Like, it's the one time I actually want to go out, they don't want to go out." So I took a shower and got all cleaned up and jumped in one of the hotel drivers took me to this place, and went in there, and it was a slow night, and there was probably 50 girls hanging out in there. And so I was at a table with like 8 girls trying to learn Spanish. And
yeah, right.
so
That's a great excuse.
Yeah, it's educational. And so I'm in there all by myself, and there was probably like 3 other dudes in the whole place. The bar people and the staff were all wearing tuxedos, red velvet floors, leather, old English style leather sofas, high back sofas, and booths, round booths, and very, very elegant place. And so I'm there for about an hour, and then here come Benny, come walking in the door, and he's like, so he's pretty excited to see me in there, and so he jumps in the booth and waves over like 5 more girls, and we're in there, drinking. You buy a whole bottle. It's the deal there. You get the whole bottle, so you're serving everybody, and it's probably $100 bottle, which was a fortune back then. And then here come Harry. Harry come walking in, and so I think Harry and Benny hired the whole staff that night and took them upstairs.
So much for not going out.
Yeah. And
they had to take a nap.
yeah, so I grabbed one girl, took her back to the hotel, and they stayed there the whole day the next day. They didn't come out till like the end of the day the next day.
They needed a day off.
Oh my gosh.
What tell me about this story where you had to steal some keys and get the hell out of someplace in the middle of the night?
So Benny, somehow in his former life, I was introduced to a general in Venezuela, and then so all these stories started really coming to life as, what I thought was just them drunk and talking about what they did. Well, apparently when we got to Venezuela, a whole caravan of military vehicles came pulling up. So Benny gave me a phone number, said, "Give this to the dock master and have him call this guy and tell him I'm here." And we were at the end of a dock in a really big marina. And so I handed it over. The guy made the phone call. And an hour later, like 12 vehicles came pulling up, and like 2 trucks with a bunch of, military dudes all come piling out, go down the dock and to secure the dock. And then this general dude gets out and comes walking down the dock, gives Benny a big hug, and "What can I do for you? It's great to see you," and all that. And because we made a couple of stops in Venezuela, but we didn't clear. And Benny said, "We don't have to clear. My general friend says it's okay. Anybody asks, we give them this phone number." So that was our clearing into the country, and we were in. And then later, the engines needed to be worked on, and the Venezuelan government flew 2 engine worth of parts
Wow.
into the country for us. to rebuild the engines. And
Benny must have done something really good for this guy.
yeah. So our first day of fishing, this picture that I brought here to show you, that was our sea trial to make sure that the engines, after being rebuilt, were right and tight. And there was a guy fighting a white marlin right out in front. And Harry said, put the lures out. Put them out. And the fly rods are all ready there. Pop them out. I had these 2 washdown kids that were working for us. I couldn't hire them. Regular mates didn't want to work for us to fly fish because they thought it was ridiculous. There was a Ezo something or other, Japanese angler.
Azo.
Yeah, he had fished there.
Was that Azo?
Oh, right. He fished the Gold Cup.
Just before we got there. And everybody, saw him, trying to catch a marlin and with no avail. And they were like, that's the dumbest kind of fishing on the planet. And nobody wanted, and they're like, oh, you're fly fishing too? No, sorry. So I couldn't get a mate. And Benny's son was mating for us, Kenny. Up until that point, his wife was having a baby. And that baby ended up being Bo Bosso's wife, actually.
Oh, wow.
So we threw the lures out, raised a fish, hooked it up, and put it in the boat like 20 minutes later.
And what was that record? That was over.
So it was 145, but so it was the first one caught on fly in Venezuela. It got disqualified over there was a lot of dispute. Billy Pate was doing, from what I understood, was doing a lot of protesting about the previous 2 fish that we had caught. And then we left after this trip. We went to Costa Rica. We left Venezuela, went to Costa Rica, and we flew in there and chartered a couple of boats. 131 Bertram called the Marlin Azul that I believe Billy Pate had actually caught a record on. And so it was kind of a funny story. This was in around December, January period. December. It was in December when we caught this fish. And so now my tour with Harry was over. We accomplished what he wanted. He wanted the 16, the 12. And Benny, got to Venezuela. And so we all disbanded. We're going to disband from there. But Harry was going to Costa Rica to just go play around with sailfish. So he said, as a tip, I'll invite you to come catch a couple sailfish. And I was really almost reluctant to do it because I knew if I didn't get back, I was going to not get another job on a boat that I wanted to be on. And because all the positions would get filled for the season. So but I'd heard all this stuff about Costa Rica. So I said, all right, maybe for a week. So we ended up going Venezuela, Colombia, Panama, and then into Costa Rica on these little shitbox planes. And with all our gear. And so had the gaffs, had the scales, had the flies, the feathers, vices, you name it, we had it. So we go put our gear out and with these Tico guys, and literally the first fish that came up, I thought it was a blue marlin. It was such a big sailfish. I was like, holy shit, we got a blue marlin. Grab the other rod, And then the crew saying, Pesvela. They didn't speak any English. And I'm like, bullshit, Pesvela my ass. That's a freaking blue marlin. As it started getting closer, I realized, and they're telling me, slow down, despacio. And I was so used to teasing marlin. I was going too fast.
Yeah.
And they're like, no, you got to let it eat it. And I'm like, what do you mean eat it? And in my world, you let him eat it, you ain't getting it back. So I slowed down, got in it, teased it in there, hooked it up, started jumping around. But I skipped over a part that was actually pretty funny. When we landed in Capos and we got out of a van, we were going to the charter company office. It was a freestanding building. It was one of the banana boat office or banana industry offices. The Capos, it's a big banana spot years ago. Well, another vehicle pulled up, and I think it was Lee Baker, and it was Billy Pate. Got out of the van. And, you go in there in the office and they would have drinks and stuff like that. So here we are after breaking his record and standing in front of this old wooden building. And so it was kind of an odd situation to be in. At least for me, I'm like, uh-oh, how's this going to play out, right? And Harry kind of shuffled over there. It's like, hey, Billy, I broke your record, right? I was like, oh boy, here we go. He's like, yeah, Harry, I heard. Congratulations. And he's like, so they're kind of making small talk. And I go to Lee Baker. I said, so how's the fishing? And Billy goes, son, it's pretty slow. He said, we only raised 35 sailfish today. And I was like, what? And I was like, 35? Holy shit. This is paradise, right? So we get out there. At the time, the most sailfish that had been caught on a fly rod was 3 in Costa Rica. That's what we were told. And so our first day, with side by side and fishing the same grounds with Billy and a few other boats, we caught 9 in our first day. And we went out the next day and caught 12. And Billy left the building. He packed his shit and left early. So he was pretty pissed. So I'd asked the crew, how big are these sailfish? And they said they're 150 pounds. So I'm ripping through the book. And then we got back that night. I was like, we could break every fly record in the book if these are 150 pound sailfish. They looked 150 pounds, and we pulled a couple of them up. It's like, Jesus, these things are monstrous. So we didn't really have the right tippet, but we carried a lot of gear because Harry and I had this thing where whenever we weren't, doing business fishing where we were after the Marlin, if we were screwing off somewhere and we would fish, he would fish fly and I would fish spin, and we had a competition to who could beat who. And he had said that there's no way I could beat him. And I used to whip his ass all the time. I was like, no way. With my nets and my spinning rods, man, I could crush him. So we had 2-pound tests, 4-pound tests, 6-pound tests, everything for the spinning rods for fun fishing. And so I said, well, we can make some tippets out of this stuff. And I gave him the line and he made the tippets. I tied the flies and we went after the 8-pound tippet, which was Rufus Wakeman's record at the time. And he was so excited to try to beat Rufus's record. And he called Rufus Dog. We're going to beat Rufus Dog's record. And I didn't even know who Rufus Dog was at that time. I'm like, all right, that sounds good. Let's beat that guy's record. So we got out there and we gaffed a fish, threw it in the boat. And I don't remember. And maybe his record was like 80 pounds or something. And the fish wasn't even big enough to beat his record. And it was supposedly 150 pounder as far as the crew was concerned. But once we hung it on the scale and they were like, oh, your scale's broken. Like, no, our scale's not broken, man. These fish just don't weigh that much. So we had to start focusing on finding the right size fish. And so a lot of times we'd tease them in. They didn't look good. They wouldn't go away. You'd have to just knock them in the head with a rod. I would take the end of a spinning rod and just smack them to get them to go away. That's how aggressive they were.
Maybe that's
back then.
why
Jeez.
Tom Evans calls them sea turds.
Yeah, well, I think Bron Hamlin started that.
The sea
So
turd.
yeah, that's where I learned it from, and of course it was funny to later have to fish with him in Guatemala, sea turd capital of the world. So, but so we once we gauged the size of the fish and realized we needed to get something bigger. I think within a couple of days we boated a fish that was a little over 100 pounds, and so then we dropped down to 6, I believe, and we caught another fish. Then we dropped down to 4, and then caught another fish. And the one on 6 didn't go. We were using a line that wasn't right, but it's what we had.
Right.
So as far as I know, unless anybody's beat it recently, those 2 4 and 8 pound Pacific records are still holding.
How long
So-
did this run with Harry last?
So, so then after that, so it was only a couple years or so.
Right.
But after that, of course, I lost any chance of getting a good deckhand job. So I said, Harry, why don't let's catch that let's catch that Pacific blue marlin. And because I started engaging with the different crews and talking and learning about the environment there and
Sure.
the fishery and the seasons and they claim there's blue marlin up to the north, but it's super rough that time of year in the winter because you got the Papagayo winds that are blowing in there, and they could puff up to 100 miles an hour. And so I got Harry talked into it, and so he said he had heard that Bubba Carter had a new boat, and it was a big boat where most of the boats were relatively small in the 30-foot range. He had a 40-something foot game fisherman that had just been built in the city, and they trucked it down. And so well, it's a great opportunity. And I've heard Bubba's a great captain and brand new game fisherman. So we packed our gear up and flew in there, and had to make a couple buzzes across the runway, which is a field with cows on it, in a like a tin roof, 12 by 12 tin roof thing, and in dirt. And so we took a private Cessna of some sort, buzzed it, ran the cows off, landed. Bubba was there in a little Toyota truck and threw our gear in it and went out and got our ass kicked because it was rough, and hooked a few fish. And I don't think Bubba realized how serious we were. And, I remember the first decent fish we had hooked up, I was already in my gear and like, why are we not backing down? Why are we still sitting here static? And then Bubba's like, oh, you guys are serious. Started cranking on it. And so another guy over there, so that's Greg Penley, he was running one of the Flamingo charter boat. There was a fleet of game fishermen out of Flamingo, and I think it was called the Flamingo 2 or something like that. He was down off Guatemala and a little further south, and there's a point there where those Papagayo winds are blocked by the mountains, so it goes from rough to literally flat calm. And it's pretty bizarre seeing that, but we packed up the boat and our crew and took off to go to Guatemala Hotel and fish out of the Playa Carrillo. And I think that fish was 208 that we caught there, was the first fish, and on fly. But one of the problems we had was all the pictures we took for the IGFA purposes with tape measures and the scale and the crew and the gaffs and the rods that you need to submit with the application were lost.
Oh.
And they didn't come out. It's like they got x-rayed or something, or the camera malfunction. Never really knew what the problem was. But here we had Bubba Carter was the captain, which was a very well-known
Sure.
captain at the time. and now this is one of our fourth or fifth, sixth, seventh fish we've submitted to the IGFA, and the word was Billy Pate was protesting our stuff. And we had Ron Hamlin involved. We had Benny Spaulding. Of course, he had a tainted past. So there was apparently an investigation of some sort. And the fact that now we don't have pictures for one of the fish was not looking really good for us. And being the first Pacific. And I kind of got myself in trouble. I went to the IGFA, and Harry's like, okay, Harry would just kind of stay and then send me back for stuff, whether materials or equipment, what have you. So one of my jobs was to go to the IGFA and find out why our record hasn't been passed yet and what's going on. And when I was staying at my mom's house here in Boca, out west, and I used that as my address, and I met some French people. They took some pictures and totally forgot about it, but they took my address and they sent the picture of the fish with the scale, with the whole crew laying on the ground, and it had its pec fin was pulled out on it. So I was like, holy shit, we got a picture. So I go to the IGFA with it, and I said, here's the picture. And they're like, oh, okay, well, we'll have to examine it. And I'm like, really? Well, who's going to examine it? I mean, here it is, it's clearly a blue marlin. We're going to have Guy Harvey look at it. And at that time, the only thing I knew about Guy Harvey was he sold a shitload of T-shirts in the Keys. And I said, the T-shirt guy? Are you kidding me? The T-shirt guy is going to be the one who's going to let us know whether this is a blue marlin or not. And they're like, well, excuse me, but Dr. Guy Harvey. Oh, okay. Sorry. So I don't think they'll ever let me live that one down. But eventually he passed it. And the T-shirt guy said, it's good.
But during this time, you guys, when you walked in, you said you were breaking a lot of 4-piece sage rods.
Yeah.
And that story is great about what you told us. And shot.
So we the rod that I have in this picture in Venezuela was a 1-piece, and because those different multiple piece rods were breaking, and my experience in the offshore was I wanted a stiffer rod, and I wanted a shorter rod, and I wanted a 1-piece rod because the failure points seemed to be at the ferrules. So we went back with those rods to the places where Harry had bought them. They wouldn't even, at that time, they weren't even replacing them. So we went into, we left where we got those, or Harry bought the 4-piece rods, 3 and 4-piece. And he decided, well, let's go check this guy, Randy Tao, out. Randy had worked for Hal Chittum. So he had left Hal and started his own shop. So he was a pretty known rod building guy. And so we pulled up to his little shop, and Billy Pate and his wife Jody were walking out of that shop. And so they were moving pretty fast, so we had no interaction, and I don't think that anybody cared to, but they drove out and we walked in, and here was this 1-piece rod sitting on this glass cabinet, and I picked it up and I was like, Harry, this is the rod we need right here. What's the story with this? Oh, Jody Pate just brought it back, said it doesn't cast worth the shit. And I said, what we need to do is just chop a few inches off the end of it, put the tip back on, and let's go. Let's use this one. And that's what we broke Billy's record with. So
it's a great story.
Worked out pretty good.
Did that ever get back to Billy or Jody?
Well, I don't know. So Harry sent me to talk to Randy about building another rod just like that, and but only paying discounted rate on it, and that we would tell everybody that about it in his shop, and Randy refused. And so we pretty much didn't tell a lot of people what rod,
right,
because Harry was pissed that he couldn't get, some kind of discount for it. And, but I believe Randy told a lot of people that the Kennedy Fisher was a good rod. And a lot of people tend to jump on that rod, but they didn't use this same rod for whatever reason. They built a whole new blank, and it was never anything like this rod.
Yeah, a lot of the early tarpon guys were using the Kennedy Fisher, the one-piece rod.
But really, you just want a fly rod that's built for fighting fish.
Yeah, we need something for lifting versus casting.
Right, because you're just chucking it out there.
And really, compared to the rods, we really did a lot with the shitty equipment we had back then. Everything from the reel. We were smoking these Billy Pate Marlin reels from G-Bore. And I flew back with a couple of them that the cork was all tore up, and knocked on their door. They literally didn't even have a sign on their old warehouse that was in Pompano, and pretty small place. And knocked on the door, and knocked on this door, knocked on that door, and somebody finally opened up. And I'm like, "Hey, so where do you build these reels?" They're like, "Yeah." I said, "My drags are all smoked up. I need new drags." And they're like, "That's impossible." I said, "No, these are tore up. I need new ones." They're like, "Okay, come in here." They're going to look at it, tell me everything's fine. They took it apart, and they're like, "Holy shit, what the hell you been fishing?" I said, "It says Marlin on it, doesn't it?" I was like, you got any better drags than this?" So I got to take these back and catch some more. And they gave me some really good grease, and showed me how to clean them a little better. And so we ended up having to grease them every night. The fly lines, we realized we were using tarpon fly lines, and they were just too fat. And so they drug in the water, and they would pop tippets from the fly line. As the fish would zigzag around, he'd create these bellies, and they'd start popping tippets. So I said, "Harry, we only need to cast 30 feet. Why do you got 150 foot on fly line on here? Let's get the skinny end of that, strip all the rest out, cut it off." And then we were able to stay connected and not break as many fish off. Shorten the rod. We went from Dacron to micron.
Mm-hmm.
So went a much lighter micron than what typical tarpon guys were using. So.
Right.
And that's extremely important when you're using 6 pound or 4 pound.
Yeah. And real big time on the light stuff.
Yeah. Did you guys ever put a section of monofilament behind the fly line? Fly line monofilament. So yeah,
we have a butt section. So we go 6 inches between the hooks.
No, I'm talking on the other side of the fly line.
Oh,
because we used to, when Harry and I were trying to catch a 6 pound tarpon record, Harry would put 100 yards of monofilament behind the fly line before you get to the back.
There were different running lines like that, but we found just getting rid of all. We could get that micro. I don't remember what pound tests we were using, but it was micronite, I think it was called.
It was so small. You didn't need a cushion or anything that stretched.
Right. And whenever you had any kind of stretch, when you're chasing a fish in the boat, it would create more belly. And so anything that could cut through the water cleaner was the direction we would go.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of those little things were what made it possible to catch that marlin.
And Dingo also said you like to fish like the lightest boat possible. Like you cut your toothbrush, like you'd weigh everything, you'd have a half a tank, right?
Yeah, and one roll of toilet paper. That's
really?
It. Yeah, I probably came in and flamed out into St. Thomas. I've been fortunate that every time I've run out of fuel, I'm literally touching the fuel dock.
Wow.
That's probably happened to me a half a dozen times. But yeah, I calculate exactly how much we need for the day.
Why was it important to have such a light boat?
Well, to be able to get on to the fish. When you have a heavy boat, it's putting out a pressure wave, and you only have an 8-foot gaff, and if your pressure wave is 12 foot out as you're backing up, you're never going to get to the fish.
Can't get to the fish.
So any boat that was light enough less water line. You go walk around a dock, and if you see a water line like this, you're probably not going to. Most of them are going to be down here. Mm-hmm. So that much to the bottom, that's just a start.
And that's a foot and a half. Just for
then
the
listeners. Angle of the shafts is pulling your stern down, and then you're taking on water, and you got the whole flat surface. It's like pushing a brick wall through the water.
Right.
So it's very important to pick that right boat to be successful. So
when did it change as far as boat building to modify the transom edges and surfaces to chase marlin?
Well,
was there a specific time?
It was probably late 80s, 90s. GNS was probably one of the only, or the fewest, that have attempted to try to make a boat that would back up, without sinking and putting that pressure wave out. I don't know if they necessarily were worried about a pressure wave, because most of those guys were conventional fishing.
Right.
But, there's rounded transoms several companies have put rounded transoms out, which will help. Reducing the shaft angle, putting pockets in to reduce the shaft angle. Mm-hmm. But if you get too much of a pocket, then you create the possibility of more cavitation in those cavitation bubbles, where you lose grip with your prop. I would also take go after props and take cup out of them. That reduces the vibration in reverse, makes it smoother in reverse. Doesn't make it great going forward, and reduces some efficiencies, but for backing up, that would help.
So you felt like backing up was a priority versus going forward in chasing fish.
Yeah, because
and in that game
to boat it, it's obviously you're going to have to handle it at the transom, at the stern, or on the side, not necessarily the transom, but you would have to handle it from the cockpit. So, if a fish in conventional fishing, I'm all about turning and running fish down forward. I haven't really had to do it that much in fly fishing, because what a lot of people don't realize is that, you're using this super light gear, really small hook. The fish are really not intimidated by it. So
they're not screaming out there.
No, they're, they know they're hooked. There's no doubt, but it's not. They don't act like it's a life or death situation. Well, it's more of an irritation.
I think too, though, because fly fishing, especially if you're fishing for records, your maximum tippet is 20 pounds, so you don't have a whole lot of drag on these fish. No. And I'm thinking, like with an offshore 130, you got 40 pounds of drag, so they're thinking, oh my God, there's jaws about me.
Yeah, exactly. And I actually recommend the angler to not have more than 2 pounds of drag on the reel. And when that fish is rolling, there's nothing you're going to do to slow it down.
Right.
So just let it roll. They actually wear themselves down, by, swimming faster. Mm-hmm. And one of the things we noticed in St. Thomas is that, and which it helped me and all the other places in the world that I fish, is that all these fish are on a migration pattern. When they're coming through somewhere, they don't live there. They're just passing through. So when you hook them, they literally just want to stay on the same path that they were on. So once you know the path, the direction they're going, if a fish pulls off a couple 100 yards of line and it looks like it's going straight down, it's now gone back to its original direction. So if you know that direction and you keep moving with it, even though it's going down, you just start heading, you can eventually get that belly and catch back up to that fish.
But that too is one of the reasons why you changed the fly rod design, or the fly rods that you guys
to be able to carry. We don't fight them straight off the back of the boat. We want it to line off the side of the boat, so that we're not behind the belly. We want to get in front of the belly, and you want to have a rod that's stiff enough to have the line off this boat far enough to where the captain can see whether the fish is going left or right, or just straight on. So if your rod is a noodle and you're standing there, and it's like this. The captain really can't tell which way the fish is going. You got to have that line, that rod up there with at least 3/4 of it stiff with a nice little soft tip from there.
I hate to break up the party, but we're going on 2 hours, and my batteries only have a couple more minutes left.
Well, thank you.
Well,
we didn't even get into the boat building and design and Chittum.
Let's make this transition real fast, because we worked together with you at Chittum. How did you, just summarize, how did you go from offshore fishing world records, driving these big boats, to getting with Hal and designing these super...
That might be a longer conversation.
Yeah, well, always having the love of skiffs and being on a lot of different skiffs growing up in the Keys. It was easy for me when I started working with Hal to have an understanding of the goals that we wanted to achieve.
Right.
And with using advanced composites. And, Hal, although I knew Hal as a teenager when he opened up his shop and bought a lot of stuff from him for my clients that I worked for, I didn't get reacquainted with him until about 2005. And I was on a mission to build my own sport fish boat. And he was on a mission to buy Heinz Farley and build a game boat for fly fishing. So we kind of had the same, we were going down the same path, just a little bit different process. And we ended up on the same tournament team. And we just started bouncing things off back and forth. And, he gave me some literature on advanced composites. And it just so happened that I had worked on a Heinz Farley that was a foam cord boat. And I also worked on a Choi Lee that was one of the first foam cord sport fish boats. And I had run that for 6 years. So I had a lot of confidence in it. And when he showed me the actual, specs and the physical properties of it, I was like, well, if this is true, nobody should be building a wood boat. And so he hired me to be a project manager at Heinz Farley. And but unfortunately, the deal didn't go through. And we ended up developing a boat with an architect. And, we worked with him for a year or so. And we had a facility. We had staff from New Zealand coming over to help us do it, the equipment. And then by that time, it was 2009. And we lost our backer for it, the Sportfish project. But the whole time we talked about a skiff we would do for ourselves. So we already had this whole skiff thing all planned out. And we were just waiting to get the big boat project rolling and then do it. And then when we lost the big boat project, there was already a deposit for a CNC machine for a 60-foot sport fish boat. So let's, instead of walking away from it, let's just build that skiff. And Hal initially was reluctant. He said he didn't want to be in the skiff business anymore. And I really didn't want to either, but I wanted to understand, I wanted to have more hands-on experience with advanced composites. And we were talking with several different builders that were going to help us. We were trying to pick one, and they all had their own idea of what material was in process was the best, and they were all different. And so we were having to try to home in on what we, thought would work out, and the best. And I said, if we do the skiff project, we can build skiffs any way we want, because we don't have hundreds of thousands of dollars in materials in a hull. Right. The skiff, we can handle that. And so we put that first skiff together, and spent a year working on a prototype.
Right.
We built a temporary mold, which nobody's ever done, to my knowledge, for a prototype build. And they just build it off a jig and hope for the best. So we wanted to know what that boat would sound and feel like. So you need a mold for that. And put that boat together, tested the hell out of it, made a lot of changes, learned a lot, and then started producing boats.
And hit a home run.
Yeah.
Well, congratulations. We're glad to be part of it.
All right. Well, thanks, guys.
All right.
I know. I wish we could have talked more about it.
Yeah.
'Cause I'm fascinated in that stuff. But
Yeah.
Thanks so much, George, for coming on.
Well,
beautiful.
I unfortunately didn't get to talk about the Nicaragua story, but maybe
we'll have you on
maybe
again.
another time.
Yeah.
No, we'd love to have you on again because you got a massive story you can't cover in one podcast.
Yeah, because then I went on to the Stalker, and then I did that boat for 13 years, and caught over 8,000 billfish.
Holy
with
shit!
those guys.
Well, we got to do another
All right,
podcast.
stay tuned.
All right, buddy.
Stay tuned.
Thanks again, George.
All right, thank you guys.
Man.
See ya.
Well, so it's just alright. Well, so it's just that story. Well, so it's just alright.